Well, torrential rain fell across the Shenandoah Mountain and our West Virginia mountains on June 17th of 1949. Petersburg, West Virginia and Stokesville, Virginia were two towns virtually destroyed by the floodwaters. And then the raging river moved into Bridgewater.
On June 17, 1949, tropical moisture set up a complex of thunderstorms right across Shenandoah Mountain. Now, torrential rain fell across the Potomac Highlands and the western side of the Shenandoah Valley. So that southeast wind was forced up the side of the mountain, and it aided in the extreme rainfall. Now, the heaviest rain was very concentrated from Shenandoah Mountain to Petersburg, anywhere from about 7 to 12 inches of rain. In West Virginia, the south branch of the Potomac typically sits at about 4 feet. During the flood, the river crested at more than 22 feet, and it's still the highest crest for that river gauge. Roads destroyed as the water rushed across the mountainous areas of Pendleton, Hardy, and Grant counties. Bridges were swept away, and some homes knocked off their foundation or just completely washed away. One woman witnessed a rescue of several people near Moorfield.
And they tried to go through, but they got caught in it. They were trying to hang on in those trees right there at the river bridge all night.
The water was rushing so fast.
This one lady was holding on to a child, and by sometime during the night she couldn't hold on to it any longer.
9 people lost their lives in West Virginia, including Winston Beckwith, who was only 2. More than 500 buildings were destroyed or damaged by the flood in Petersburg. The once booming railroad town of Stokesville was suddenly submerged underwater as the North River turned from a creek to a wall of water on that Friday evening. Jim Emmett was 17 at the time. After several hours, his dad went out to check how deep the water was.
He come back in, he looked so funny, he said, "We got to get out of here." So he got grandmother on his back and tried to go out, and the water was too swift, couldn't make it.
The family retreated back to the house.
We went upstairs and we stayed up there all night, and sometime during the night it moved the house about 10, 12 feet and jammed it into an apple tree.
And this is the family home after the water receded.
The homes down through here on this side, they washed away.
The raging floodwaters damaged or destroyed every building in the small community of Stokesville. That is, except for one, and that's the Stokesville Church. That still stands today.
It was the only thing left here. Now, of course, the water was coming under the bridge and all the way through here.
The worst of the floodwaters were diverted around the church.
It did not have the damaging flow that it had on either side of the church, but I think the foundation held it.
Ginny Mays was only 3 during the flood, but she can still remember that terrifying night.
It was traumatic. For a 3-year-old, I can remember my dad holding me in his left arm, and he was supporting my mom, who was holding my little Chihuahua pet. And we went through the floodwaters.
The family waited to a nearby 2-story home, praying that the rain would stop soon.
There were horrible noises, and the house was creaking.
Everyone in Stokesville survived, but the town was changed forever. And the raging floodwaters moved downriver to Bridgewater.
Yeah, you never forget something like that.
Don Landis was 8 at the time of the flood. But heavy rain did not directly fall in Bridgewater. It was the torrential rain on Shenandoah Mountain that flowed downstream into the North and Dry River. Both converge at Bridgewater.
It just come down through there like a wall of water. And
many retreated to the 2nd story of their homes.
It got about 6 foot deep in our house.
Maynard Southard was 20 at the time, but one home just could not stand up to the power of the floodwaters.
That great big 2-story house, wooden house, washed away and completely broke up. There wasn't any parts of it left.
Margaret Bricker and her 2 daughters were all swept away by the raging river.
The Bricker house washed away sometime after midnight because they were screaming.
And the next morning, Southard and another boy were called out to a tree where Betty Bricker was found alive.
We got just a rowboat and went down the river, pretty fast. She was, of course, live and up in this one tree, just a single tree, wasn't a bunch of limbs on it. Of course, she'd been there for hours.
Her mother and sister Frances did not make it, but Betty survived all night in a tree.
The darndest thing, how she lived through all that. And she wound up in a tree and lived.
Another woman, Mrs. Bowman, was also swept away by the floodwaters. The town was nearly in ruins, the water leaving behind a mess of mud and debris.
All the damage had been done. It was a big mess.
Because of several past major floods, plus this catastrophe in 1949, several new dams were built in the North River watershed. The town of Bridgewater also built this levee, which has since held up against major flooding.
The 49 flood was the catalyst for all the changes you see in this area.
Bob Holton is the former town manager of Bridgewater.
I think the fact that we had loss of life in that flood was the main factor, and started the process, and about 3 years later this was built.
And the levee has been put to the test.
The 85 flood and the 96 flood, with 85 being the biggest. If this had not been built, we would have had 2 floods that did a lot of damage in this town.
Working hard for you, Chief Meteorologist Aubrey Urbanowitz, WHSV.